This is Christian Gomez with the New American Magazine, and today on the program we have an American currently living in Santiago, Chile, who's going to tell us a bit about what's been going on down there with the protests in Chile. Thank you for joining us on the program this morning.
Thank you, Christian.
So, can you tell us who you are and a little bit about yourself and what's been going on down there in Chile?
My name is Leah. I have my own business here, and for about the last a little more than 2 weeks, starting on October 18th, it's been great chaos and turmoil. Seems to be calming down in some ways and heating up in other ways. Calming down a little bit in the violence. The violence now tends to be only in the evenings, and the protests begin as peaceful, and then the rioters, looters, troublemakers, whatever you want to call them, start their activity in fighting the police. Not only at night, yesterday during the day, they ransacked or attempted to ransack one mall in Viña del Mar. And actually, it didn't make it to the news, but last night, about 2 blocks from my house, is the largest mall in Santiago with the tallest building in all of Latin America. It's 70 stories high. And from the beginning, I thought this is a beautiful target for people to show the death of neoliberalism if they could possibly burn this beautiful building down. So it truly is, in my opinion, terrorists who are wanting to make the people so afraid and giving them an opportunity to air their frustrations and all the things that they're not happy about. And of course, just about everybody's got something to say, but they are not aware of what the direction that they're taking that this is not going to end well if they continue with all this protesting.
Now, you mentioned the 70-story tall skyscraper there in Santiago, and how if it were to be burned down, that could represent the death of neoliberalism. Now, we've seen a lot from the mainstream media here in the United States and throughout the West that this whole protest, all these protests down there in Santiago, are directed against years of failed neoliberal free market policies and so forth. Would you describe these protests as being anti-capitalist in nature? And can you tell us a little bit about what they hope to achieve?
I would say there's various groups that are involved in this. The general population, I believe the survey that I saw yesterday said 80% of the people support these protests. I think what that means is that 87% of the people recognize that there are unresolved problems here that could be resolved and should be resolved. And people have been protesting for these things for a very long time, but the government has not listened to them and things are not changing. So I think that's the 87%. Then there are those who are out protesting every single day, those in the unions who want to cause disruption, the truckers who are blocking traffic, who are preventing goods and services from getting to where they need to be, who've destroyed the toll booths, setting fires on the roads. And then there are those that I would just call the terrorists. From what I can see, they're the 15 to 25-year-old young men. What's behind them? Is it just male testosterone? I don't know. Is somebody paying them to do it? I don't know. But it's got to stop. And the police have been entirely handicapped. I would say the police are out there trying to fight this with both arms tied behind their back. So the human rights protectors of the world are there with their video cameras watching everything the police do. Sadly, they don't seem to get the footage of the police being abused and beaten up and set on fire like they were yesterday. So that's probably the most upsetting thing for me, is to watch that the police are incapable of doing anything. The military was called back out again because the military causes such trauma in the people from their history of having lived under a dictatorship, if you want to, but it was under military rule. And so the military for the Chilean people is the last thing they ever want to see. So it's up to the police. The police are incapable of getting this under control.
So, would you say that these protests are dividing the country then?
It's uniting them in one way, in that everyone agrees that life could be better and that there's a lot of unfair situations within the country. But many of these are not that difficult to resolve. many of them I don't think are even political. They want to blame the Constitution. It's not based on the Constitution that these things are happening. The politicians have, of course, abused their powers, as they tend to do throughout the world. Companies have abused their powers. They have colluded in price fixing and things like that. And so I think it's just reached a boiling point of people being sick and tired of being taken advantage of and abused. So, although capitalism has worked beautifully well here, and I would say most people do recognize that their life has improved dramatically in the last 30 years in Chile, and they know that capitalism is the cause of that. They also can focus on all the bad aspects of capitalism, if you want to call it that. I don't. I think what I've come to the conclusion for now is this is not a failure of capitalism. This is a failure of their character. And for capitalism to work, you need morality and you need values. And the great frustration of mine of having lived here is that Latin Americans in general tend to have a win-lose attitude. So they're going to look for how they can take advantage and make sure that you lose. And this seems to be within the rich, within the top people, within the poor people. It's a massive problem in this country. And I think that if you cannot be a moral people and work in a way that's a win-win situation, then capitalism will fail you because people will abuse freedom.
Now, you mentioned that one poll where it showed that over 80% of the population seems to support these protests. Do you see that poll is being repeated in the media to show that there's perhaps larger support for certain aims of the protests, when in fact the polls, as you indicated, may only show more of a broader support in terms of grievance against the state, but not necessarily unity in terms of a specific policy reform that they would like to achieve?
I think the propaganda that I see is for a constitutional assembly, and that this is the failure of neoliberalism. And this is what we have needed to bring down, was the last vestige of General Pinochet's dictatorship. And so it's definitely the left stirring up discontent. Discontent is easy to do. It's human nature for people to envy and to be angry about what they don't have. So it's an easy cause to stir up discontent.
So can you tell us a little bit about the Constituent Assembly or Constitutional Assembly? If it were to happen and the courts were to legitimize it, what do you think would come out of such an assembly, given the chaos and the demands of the protests that we see going on in the last several weeks?
I see absolutely nothing good coming out of opening up that can. Best left alone. Fix the Constitution if it needs fixing. But to be honest, these people are calling for a constitutional assembly as though this is the magic fix. And yet I can tell you almost no one has read the Constitution and even knows what it says. So it's pure propaganda, as this is the last vestige of the dictatorship. Most all of those objectionable things have been taken out of the Constitution. And I have been asking on social media, please point to me what specific articles need to be changed. And very few people even know what would need to be changed. So they misunderstand what a constitution is and what the purpose of it is. And they're trying to bring everybody, you'll recognize this, what they're trying to do is have town hall meetings, have everybody bring their grievances. And I have heard from people I personally know who have been there who asked, is this related to any political party? They say no. They went and did some check on them after they found out who their names were, and they were surely connected to Communist Party people who want to run these town hall meetings and allow people to air their grievances. So it's very, very, in my opinion, left-wing driven. But the general protests and the general protests of the people and the support of these protests is just because life is not very fair here. Life is, you know, that you're being taken advantage of in just about every industry here. And that's frustrating for the people. It's frustrating for everyone, and everyone wants it to stop. But governmental fixes is not what needs to happen. It's society that needs to be fixed. everyone in their own values needs to stop trying to take advantage of other people.
And one final question. What is your estimate of how, or assessment of how President Boneta has handled the crisis? Would you say he's done a good job handling it, or is he in fact committing human rights violations, as many in the protest community are alleging is the case?
Well, let's see. If you have a terrorist attack and you get your military out, it's because you're scared that this has to be stopped, right? But if you see it as it was a bunch of young kids who were a little angry over a rate increase, and everybody has a right to get some of their little anger out, then it depends on how you perceive these things. So I would assume that Piñera saw it very much from this as a potential true terrorist attack, and we need to stop this quickly, and brought out the military. It caused panic in the people, though. The people panicked. They hadn't seen the military out on their streets for a very, very, very long time. So I've asked people, what would you have done? And they say, well, yes, I guess under those circumstances, I would have done the same. And yet there's horrific criticism of the decisions that he's made. So I'm not one to decide. I do think that he should be much stronger on this. The word terrorism has never been said. It's all about protesters. There are protesters who have valid complaints, who have valid rights to be protesting. But violence and terrorism and burning and fighting and abusing the police is, to me, not a right of a protester. And in that case, you become a criminal. And in my opinion, that's when you can bring out your police and, if necessary, your military to get control. There is no law and order here, and this is what needs to happen. How long are they going to let the bad guys here continue with their destruction?
Well said. Well, thank you for joining us today on the program, and we hope to have you on again in the future as well, as we continue to cover this story of the protests going on in Santiago and all throughout Chile. Thank you for joining us today on the program. Take care and stay safe.